Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 38 of the Rickenbacker 620 12-string build, and in this episode we're going to continue with the finishing process by getting a burst sprayed onto this thing. We left last time and we'd just got this amber coat on, kind of all over the guitar. Now, I'm actually quite pleased with the back. I think that looks really quite nice. I like the colour of the amber over the maple, and I think that will age really well. However, I'm not that happy with the top. Now, this maple has got a little bit of figure in it, but it's not very even. And the uneven nature of the figure is kind of making this top look a little bit blotchy. The figure in this central area is quite nice. And bear in mind, most of this lower half is covered in scratch plate, so not too concerned about that. But this section looks quite nice, it's okay. And some of this here is fine. So I feel I need to do something more. Now, I always thought in my mind that this was going to be fire glow, and this has just convinced me more than anything that we need to do that. So what I'm going to do is put a burst around this. I'm going to do the burst on the top. The actual Rickenbackers have a slight burst around the back as well, so I'm going to do that. Kind of ends at the heel, and then the back of the headstock and a little bit of the neck and the front of the headstock is also done. Now, on some of them, with the front of the headstock, they kind of go red, amber, red. I don't want to do that because we've got this logo, and if you remember back to when we fitted it, it isn't the best fit in the world. So I'm going to glue the logo in and spray some red over there. I'm going to leave the logo a little bit proud so we can clean it off and rub it down and get rid of the paint off it. But what I'm hoping is that the paint will fill any little voids. If it doesn't, I can always drop some in with a pin or something to fill those little gaps up, and then we can rub that flat and lacquer over the whole lot, and I think that should make it look good. So the first step in that is to get everything masked off again, and then we can get it to the spray booth. But don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit through 5 minutes of masking in this episode. Okay, so that's that taped up. Didn't take too long. And before we take it down to the paint booth, I just need to get this logo super glued in. And with that done, we just need to mix up some of the burst colour. And what I've got is Heritage Cherry Nitrocellulose, and this is pretty much all of my paints come from Northwest Guitars, because they'll do you a nice guitar sized pot for a very reasonable price. And what I'm hoping is that this isn't the kind of bright red that you would get on a brand new Les Paul standard, say. I want it to be a little bit darker than that, and looking at this lid, I think that's what we've got. So hopefully this will turn out how I want it. So I'll just get a little bit of that into there. And I'm using anti-bloom thinner in this. To be honest, it's probably about 15 degrees ambient temperature at the moment, so I'm not sure I need to use that thinner, but it's better than the standard thinner that I've got, so we'll go with it. You might be able to see there, that's actually looking quite a nice deep blood red colour, so yeah, happy with that. Okay, just need to get the spray gun put together and we can get some of this laid down. Okay, so that's the first pass of the burst done. It looks a little bit uneven in some places, but I can touch that up with the next go round. And a little bit of a burst on the back as well. I think I need to put a little bit more in this heel transition area. And there's the front of the headstock and the back. And again, I think I need to just put a little bit more of a transition into here. But other than that, I'm quite happy. And I like the way you can still see the Purple Heart through the colour. So that's good as well. So I'll leave that to dry for a little bit and then we can just touch it up. But all in all, I think that looks a lot better and I'm much, much happier with this colour. Okay, so there's the start of the burst done. Quite happy with it, but there are one or two little issues that we need to iron out. It's a little bit uneven as we come through here. This is a bit too thin, we need a bit more paint on there, and this kind of comes around at a funny angle. So I'm just going to work to even that up. I think it's worth bearing in mind, and this is always the case with these bursts, that when you first do them, they always kind of look a little bit odd. And the main reason for that is the top of the guitar is completely naked. There's nothing else on it, so all you're seeing is the burst. And I'm going to be very gentle when I do this because this will still be quite soft. But if we just kind of stick even a few little elements onto the guitar, it completely takes your eye off that burst and it totally changes the look. But there are one or two little bits that we need to sort out, so we will get those done now. However, I'm not going to start on the top because I want that to be the last bit I do. We did identify that there was a little bit of kind of tidying up needed on both the heel and the headstock transition. So I'm going to do those first and then we can flip it over and spend a bit of time getting the top sorted out. Now, I'm not going to use the big spray gun for this. We're kind of past the stage of using that. So instead, I'm just going to break out my little airbrush and do it with that instead. Okay, so I think that looks an awful lot better now. Much, much more even. So I'm really happy with that. But there was one little bit that I noticed when I put that control plate in. And that is, there's a little bit around here that's too light. So I need to just kind of gently position that roughly where it's going to go and get an idea of what I need to do. And just darken in that section there. I don't want any of this lightish stuff peeking out underneath the bottom of the scratch plate. But apart from that, I'm really happy with it. Okay, so that's all of the patching up work done. So the next spraying job is to actually lay down a whole bunch of clear coats and get all of this covered over nicely so we've got a nice, thick, deep, uniform finish. But before we can do that, we need to remove the masking off the binding, which is always a tricky but enjoyable job, if you can get a start. Because you kind of get your first glimpses of what the finished guitar is going to look like. And I think taking that binding off really does make a Massive difference. And it just, again, it's another little thing that's going to kind of normalise the look of the burst. Now, that unfortunately is only half the story, and we have to do what, I will be honest, is one of my kind of least favourite jobs. Mainly because I've got relatively steady hands, but they can be a little bit wobbly at times, and you need quite a steady hand for this job. And that is scraping off the top edge of this binding. You can get it wrong, but once you get your head around it and once you get used to doing it, it's quite straightforward. However, the amber base coat for this has been sat for a couple of days now, so that might have hardened a little bit beyond where I might want it to have been, but we are where we are and we're just going to have to deal with it. The problem is that if it's too hard, it can kind of chip when you're scraping these, which is what you don't want. But I think we'll be okay. Chances are this red has kind of softened up what's underneath it. So fingers crossed, we'll be good to go. But this is quite a delicate job, so I'm going to need my big eyes on as well as my glasses, and we'll see how we get on. And all I'm going to do is, I've got a Stanley knife blade, or a utility knife blade as you might know them in other parts of the world, and I'm going to pinch it with my thumb and finger so it only cuts as far as that binding. And what I tend to do is go in at a bit of an angle and just take that inside out and then go back and flatten it out and just take the rest of that off. And then I just need to work my way around the whole perimeter. Thankfully, we've only got binding on the top. Okay, so that's the binding scraped off. Took ages, and I've got a backache now from leaning over it, but they are done and they do look very nice. I'm happy with those, and I think you can see that with those done, it kind of just kind of brings that burst together a little bit as well. So yeah, really happy with that. That only really leaves us one aspect to do before we can get some clear coat onto this, and that is to go up the other end and sort out the front of the headstock. Okay, so that's that inlay kind of glued into place and painted over. Now you might see there are a few little gaps around it, but it actually doesn't look that bad. A fair bit of paint has got into those gaps and kind of has made things look a lot better, but we'll only really tell when we get this paint off the inlay. So I've just got a little block here with some 220 grit paper on, and I'm just going to ever so gently Kind of start working that down. Just checking the whole time that I'm not actually hitting the paint on the headstock. It's quite low at this little spot, so I need to be a little bit more careful. And it's very low here, so I need to be extremely careful there. And that's the paint off anyway. Now this is still quite proud of the surface, and to be honest, I think it's too much of an ask to kind of get that totally flatted back without impacting the surrounding paintwork too much. But let's just try and get it a little bit closer with a bigger block. And that has taken just a tiny little bit off, so I'm not going to take that any further. What I'll do is I'll just kind of roughly mask this off. I'll patch those two areas in with the airbrush, and then this will be ready for its clear coats. That is actually a lot better, so I think with some good clear coats over that, it's going to be kind of more than acceptable. Okay, so that's just touched in. I'll let that set up a little while longer, and then we can get this over to the spray booth again and start laying down some clear coats. But I'm probably going to do that off camera because this episode is going to run on far too long otherwise. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time with that. As always, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.